Good morning, and welcome to North Chapel. It's wonderful to be all together today. So this is the time where you should make sure that nothing is going to buzz or beep. If you could turn off cell phones. If you're visiting today, welcome. And we have a book in the back we'd love for you to sign. Thank you for being here. There are always lots of announcements in the order of service, and our website is also a wealth of information. Tatum is here for the kiddos, and we have a nice big group, which is great to see. There will be soup downstairs after the service. Ken Woodhead is so generous with us and has been making 2 kinds of soup each Sunday. So if you can join us after the service, that would be wonderful. And we have a couple of extra announcements. Deb?
I'm announcing that for our North Chapel Spring Bulbs and Seeds fundraiser, there is an order form, and there are some at the back table there, and there are some pinned up to the bulletin board downstairs, if you think of it when you're down there. It's a easy way to raise money for the church. You can go online, make your order, and have it delivered to your house. You'll pay shipping. If you want, you can make your order and give it back to North Chapel, and we will make a group order, so you will have no shipping. You just have to come here and pick up your order when it comes in. Mary is going to be ordering every week from now until, I forget what date, but pretty soon. The seeds and bulbs will come to the church in early May. And these are flowers that bloom in the summer. There's pollinator gardens. There's also summer flowering bulbs like gladiolas and daylilies and so forth. Okay, thanks.
Good morning. I'm David Fryman. I want to promote the book club, which is meeting this Thursday. We meet monthly. And for me, it's been a great way to meet people in the congregation, but even more so, since I don't get to pick the book, these books tend to kind of push me out of my comfort zone, which then creates some really stimulating conversation. So even if sometimes people haven't read the whole book or maybe not read it at all, but the conversation is about the things that the book brings up. And so it's been really fun to explore that, and it's a nice change of pace once a month. So I highly recommend come this Thursday. If you haven't read the book, it's a book about Vermont mostly, by a Vermont author, and it's very amusing, very funny. It's a wacky book.
Our opening words this morning were written by Susmita Mukherjee, entitled, "Do I Believe in Angels?" I believe in the whisper of wings, unseen but felt, like a soft breeze brushing past on the stillest of days. I believe in the sudden glow of warmth within, when shadows press too close, when the world seems too heavy to bear. Not in halos or robes, not in golden trumpets, but in the gentle nudge toward the right path, a stranger's kind word, and the resilience of a child's laughter, the steadfast light of the moon watching over us all. I believe in moments that shimmer like dewdrops caught in dawn, where grace lingers quietly, unassuming, unnoticed by many, but undeniable once found. Perhaps angels are not what stories say, not celestial beings descending in splendor, but the hidden threads weaving miracles into the mundane. So yes, I believe in angels, not because I've seen them, but because I've felt them. We'll now have a time of silent meditation and prayer.
Learn to govern your passions, or they will be your undoing. What do you think of that advice? Do you think it's wise? Personally, I've been wondering for years. I learned a different wisdom this week that's just as beautiful, words that I had never heard before. Be clearly aware of the stars and of infinity on high. Then life seems almost enchanted after all. $5 for whoever can name the source.
Musician.
It is not.
It's in a Disney film.
What was that?
It's in a Disney film.
It's in a Disney film? It could be, but it's not the source.
Not the $5.
Good morning and good Sunday. I hope that this new day finds you well. Today is Sunday, March 16th, and the title of this morning's reflection is Discipline and the Passionate Fire. High above us in outer space, Dr. McCoy from Star Trek was almost boiling over with rage. He had sage advice. Spock had sage advice for him. He said, "Learn to govern your passions, Doctor, or they will be your undoing." He was like, "Learn to hold your fire, man, or your fires will burn you down." McCoy couldn't take it in. He rejected this advice, calling Spock a green-blooded, inhuman, which is probably racist in some Star Trek kind of way. What are the merits of being dispassionate? What is the advantage to discipline with respect to the fires that burn within? Artists, poets, and painters and musicians, they tend to be passionate people. Some athletes, not all, and some politicians, not all, tend to be outwardly passionate. Passion has its place and it has its extremes, very high highs and very low lows. The highs are golden and obvious. The lows are blue and full of mystery. What do we know about living in the blue? Why are we drawn into the mystery? In her song about Vincent van Gogh, Joni Mitchell asks questions like these. Because Van Gogh was fascinating. He was full of sage advice. Van Gogh said, "The best way to know God is to love many things." And Van Gogh said, "If you truly love nature, you will find beauty everywhere." And Van Gogh said, "There's nothing more truly artistic than to love people." What do you think? Do you love many things? Do you find beauty everywhere? Do you love people, including the people that you may not like? Because that's what it's going to take if we're going to stay free. We'll have to be brave in heart and in mind and in soul. That's what it's going to take. But don't you worry none. The spiritual journey is a joyful one. Its fires do not burn us down. Vincent van Gogh was on fire. His dreams burned beautifully within him. They warmed his soul. What dreams burn within you, dear ones? What dreams set your mind and soul ablaze? Imagine an empty attic where Vincent van Gogh stored many paintings. Imagine the fires that softly burned within the man. Imagine his passion and perhaps his loneliness. Joni Mitchell writes of him, "I'm a burning hearth," he said. "People see the smoke, but no one comes to warm themselves. And all my little landscapes and all my yellow afternoons stack up in this vacancy like dirty cups and spoons. Oh, what do you know about living in turbulent indigo? What do we know about living in the deepest blue there is when life is hard, when we feel alone? And what do we do about getting over it?" So here's the thing. Have you ever been asked to do something that you didn't want to do? Something that you felt you had to do? Something that others expected of you? Something that you knew for sure was going to hurt somebody else? Something that that person didn't want and didn't deserve and didn't even know was coming? In the brutal game of love, have you been asked? In the brutal game of life? Or in the bitter game of women's basketball? I saw this happen center court. Excuse me. I saw this happen center court on a highlights reel on YouTube this week. It was part of a strategy of the losing team. They wanted to shut down a player named Caitlin Clark. Do you know about Caitlin Clark? Caitlin Clark is a basketball player. She's extremely talented. She's inwardly fired. She's outwardly cool as a competitor. She's fierce and she's relentless and she does not like to lose. She's changing the rules of the game. She's changing the way the game is played and she's succeeding. So a lot of people, a lot of other players are freaking out. And that happens. That always happens. Always. Caitlin Clark is fierce and she does not like to lose, but she never sacrifices fairness. She never surrenders her dignity. She seems to have a heart of gold and wisdom enough to use it. She's a serious player, a serious leader. She's among the best to ever play the game, which means, unfortunately, that the jealous and the less talented are threatened by her. They hate on her sometimes. Like Vincent van Gogh, she too is a burning hearth, but too few come to warm themselves, and far too many try to put her fires out. She's great about it though, transforming their negativity into something that's more constructive, choosing to use adversity to her advantage, and so beautifully. So I saw this clip in the highlights, and it fascinated me. It was an exchange between Caitlin Clark, who had the ball and was advancing, and a defending player who was on a mission. She was on a mission to eliminate the threat, physically, brutally, if necessary. And she was pretty brutal. She moved on Caitlin Clark so fast and so aggressively that she knocked Clark to the ground, hard. The play looked more like hockey than basketball. It looked like a sucker punch on the playground after some childish schoolyard taunts. It was bad. She seemed abusive. It seemed like her own fires had burned her down, and she seemed to regret it right away. After this interaction came the most amazing moment. It didn't come from Caitlin Clark, who was amazing, by the way. Amazing in the way she responded to the fragrant foul with grace and determination. She gathered herself, she contained herself defiantly and dispassionately. She refused to take part in the bitterness that had just been delivered to her. But this was not the most amazing thing. The most amazing thing didn't come from Caitlin Clark. It came from the woman who had just delivered the blow. It came from Caitlin Clark's opponent who had just fouled her so egregiously, so deliberately, and so intentionally. After committing her foul, this player reached out with both hands, and she reached out right away after she leveled her opponent. She regretted what she did immediately. She reached out with both hands. Her whole body was regret. I think she was trying to say, "I'm sorry. I feel terribly for hurting you. I was told to do so by my coach. I had to do it. Or at least I felt like I had to do it. It's a strategy we have, and I'm a team player. I'm just part of the team. I'm just doing what I was told." It looked like she felt ashamed and crestfallen and horrible for having participated in the plans of a ruthless coach. It wasn't mature, and it wasn't complete, and it wasn't pretty, but at least it was real. It looked like real regret, and it was not enough. It was not satisfying. It was not a real apology. There was no time for that. It was so much not enough, but it's all that we had. And it's more than we tend to see in life these days. What do we really know about life? What do we know about mystery? All I know for sure is that life is more complicated than I thought it was. All I know for sure is that we are part of one another, even though we rarely admit this to ourselves. How was it that the Beatles put it all those years ago? I am he, and you are he, and you are me, and we are all together. Those words are truer than we realize sometimes. Maybe truer now than they were before. So there was an interesting story that was not in the news cycle this week. It was a story about a special kind of fire. It wasn't an outward fire like we just saw in Los Angeles. It was an inward fire. Excuse me, and it wasn't a wildfire. It was neither tameless nor undisciplined. It wasn't the kind of fire that gets the better of us. The story wasn't in the news because it was barely heard. Not for the first time, but hopefully for the last. A woman named Sarah McBride, the at-large Congress member from the state of Delaware, was intentionally misgendered in a public hearing. Congressmember McBride had been misgendered weeks before, that time by a Representative Mary Miller from the 15th District of Illinois. The 15th District is a fairly large district. It's half rural, half urban, home to a population of about 750,000 people. It's a gerrymandered district. It's been shaped by party lines, structured by racial and economic lines that we now call cultural. Illinois 15 is bisected. It's cut through almost entirely by another gerrymandered district, Illinois 13. This district is shaped like the upper portion of a lowercase letter R. It's smaller in size, it's 5 times smaller, and it's home to roughly the same amount of people, so it's mostly urban, actually. Mary Miller and the representative from Illinois 15 referred to Sarah as Mr. McBride. Mary fouled Sarah egregiously. She was jealous of a better player, like she was threatened by a greater talent, like she had to resort to participating in the plans of a ruthless coach. Free speech is free speech, and the First Amendment protects us all. So I suppose that Miller could have referred to McBride as a walrus if she wanted to. But not without soiling her own dress, not without defiling her own decency and dignity. Miller defiles herself when she does what she's told to do, when she behaves, when she obeys, when she plays dirty basketball. We weaken the game, we weaken the value and the meaning of sport when we pretend that it's good to win at all costs. That's wrong, and we know it's wrong. Why hesitate to name it thus? I don't really blame people like Mary Miller, not just yet. It's hard to be courageous. We all need time to grow into our higher selves. Maybe Mary and people like her haven't had the time they need to grow. So I don't blame people like her just yet, because life is complicated, more complicated than we know. And there are things that all of us can learn. There are others like Miller in Congress. Keith Self from Texas, he's just like her, and he too misgendered Sarah McBride, and he got called out for it. The part that wasn't in the news is that when he misgendered her, calling her Mr. McBride, she quickly responded by saying, "Thank you, Madam Chairperson." Turnabout is fair play. Congressmember Sarah McBride of Delaware is the first openly transgender person in Congress, And some people in Congress don't know how to deal with that just yet. They're struggling, they are inelegant, and it freaks them out a lot. And then the wildfires get the better of them. People like Mary and Keith are threatened by people like Sarah McBride, and they're trying to do their best to make people like Sarah pay. And we can get offended by this if we'd like. We can make wildfires of our own and get burned, perhaps. But this is not the best practice of our faith. It's what we tend to do when we are out of practice, when we are out of shape. So maybe we need to get back to the gym and tone up a little bit. Disciplined, spiritual people always have a practice. Practice is what it means to be disciplined. Discipline grows the soul in difficult times. And people like Sarah McBride are leading the way. They are teaching us how to do it. Some of us are trying, and some others of us are trying to exact a price. The more frightened ones among us are holding on to the past, are clinging to rocks in a rapidly changing world. The more courageous ones among us have been learning how to swim, how to surf, how to water ski. So the choice is yours. What will you do? Will you be like Mary and Keith, or are you more like Sarah McBride? Change is hard for all of us, and we shouldn't be surprised when some of us are sore afraid. We shouldn't blame those of us who are frightened for holding on to old rocks, but we do not need to follow them anymore. Canceling the real and the lived experience of fellow Americans is not true leadership. It's belligerence. It's a brokenness of faith. It's a failure of the imagination. It's the defilement of the new American possibility that isn't new. Human sexuality isn't new. It's just that we're dealing with it now. When we feel like we're drowning, we tend to reach for solid ground, even if we have to create that solid ground beneath our feet. And when we fail to invent that ground, when there are no more rocks to cling to, we feel at risk, we feel terrified, we feel afraid of being lost at sea. As if for safety, we lash out to those we think we can beat in government, in basketball, in life. And when our manufactured opponents show the willingness to fight us back with quiet fire, with discipline, with integrity and joy, real growth is possible. Sarah McBride fights back with quiet fire. Caitlin Clark fights back with quiet fire. Her opponent, through her regret, fights back with quiet fire too. It's important to fight with the kind of fire that does not burn us down, the kind of fire that burns none of us down, the kind of fire that warms and nurtures all souls, no exceptions. Vincent van Gogh said, "Be clearly aware of the stars and infinity on high." Then life seems almost enchanted after all. How willing are we to be enchanted? As disciplined spiritual seekers, we know that it's good to be enchanted. As disciplined artists and politicians, we know. As disciplined athletes and general managers, we know that it's good to be enchanted. It's good to be aware of the stars and infinity on high. One more sports thing before we close. Years ago, a man named Billy Beane was enchanted. He was a disciplined general manager of the Oakland A's, or the Oakland Athletics, the bottom tier baseball team from the east side of the San Francisco Bay. Billy Beane changed the rules of the game. He changed the way the game is played, and he succeeded, and he freaked a lot of people out. His story is about a quiet fireman and his attempt to change the game of baseball. He didn't scout like other scouts, and he didn't recruit like other recruiters, and he didn't theorize or organize or strategize like anyone else in the game. He didn't allow his team to play the game of baseball like other teams in the league. His team played like no one else's team, and they won like nobody's business. They were spectacularly successful against the odds and against the grain. The A's won 20 games in a row that season, and that's a record. The A's astounded absolutely everyone. Billy Beane changed the rules of the game. He changed the way the game was played, and he freaked almost everybody out, just like Sarah McBride is doing now. The Boston Red Sox were one of the teams that wasn't freaking out. They were not cleaving to tradition. They were not clinging to rocks. They didn't have the time. They were learning how to swim, meaning they were busy reinventing themselves. John Henry was the owner of the team at the time. He reached out to Billy Beane, had him over for lunch. He knew that the Oakland A's had done something special, and he wanted in. Billy Beane was hated for being different than the others, but this did not deter John Henry a bit. He wasn't surprised. He expected this. He said, "I know that you're taking it in the teeth, but the first guy through the wall always gets bloody. Always." It's threatening, not just to their way of doing business, but in their minds, it's threatening to the game. Every time that happens, whether it's government, a way of doing business, or whatever, people who are holding the reins, they just go crazy. The analogy here is clear enough, I hope. This is what is happening to people like us, people like Keith and Mary these days. It's hard to adjust to brand new ways. When we are not disciplined, our passions get the better of us. We get frightened, and we conform to power, and we obey, and are hopeless and short-sighted, and misempowered, and anxiously misled, stubbornly clinging to the past in a rapidly changing world. Descending to our culture's lowest common denominators instead of striving for its highest human values. This descent is not leadership, it's fecklessness. It's what happens in the absence of a quiet fire within. It's what happens when we lose our ability to govern our passions, when we are undone, when it's hard for us to know the difference between our lowest and our highest aspirations. Congressman Sarah McBride has been misgendered many times. Each time she has chosen not to take the bait. She has chosen not to fall into the traps that have been prepared for her. She stayed cool. She stayed cool, but her colleagues exploded at the indecency that they experienced. They yelled at the chair of the meeting in a public way and then were criticized for it, for lacking decorum. So Sarah stepped in and she said, "We will not take a lecture on decorum from the party that incited an insurrection." She said, and this I quote, "I wish that my colleagues would spend even a fraction of the time that they spend thinking about me, thinking about how to lower the costs for American families." She said, "I wish that they would spend a fraction of the time they spend thinking about me, figuring out how to make government actually work rather than to make it work worse in order to prove that government can't work." They are obsessed with the culture wars. It's weird and it's bizarre, and the American people deserve serious legislators, serious elected officials who are focused on bringing people together, not to deliver real results for the American people, and not to play games or engage in schoolyard taunts. We need not long for better politics. That's not the size and shape of prayer. We long for the lessening of suffering. We long for a more compassionate humanity. We long for more beautiful competition. We long for right measures of honor and integrity. We long for reason and fairness in play. We long for that which dignifies us again. This is the size and shape of prayer. Vincent van Gogh said, "If you truly love nature, you will find beauty everywhere, in Star Trek movies, in basketball games, and in the halls of Congress. Thank you, Sarah, for reminding us what it means to have decency in our time, to remind us what it means to believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person on this earth, and to honor the inmost wisdom of one's own soul. To those of us who may be freaking out about the changes in our world, to those of us who may not yet have learned how to govern our passions, to those of us who may be jealous or insecure or threatened by life's beautiful complexity, and who agree to undermine that complexity and that beauty in nefarious ways, I can say only this: I'm with her. She knows how to hold her fire. She holds her fire in such a sacred way. Maybe soon, you too can follow along with the rest of us. You would be welcome. Maybe so. Blessed be and amen.